They abandoned me at 16 with a note that Syed don't follow us. 9 years later, after I made it without them, they wanted a cut. I was 16. When I came home from a shift at the grocery store and found the house empty. Not robbed. Emptied on purpose, furniture and all. Right down to the nail holes where picture frames used to hang. My parents had taken my younger brother and moved across the country without me. The only thing left behind was a note on the kitchen floor. 3 words. Don't follow us. I stood in that empty kitchen for a long time before I even processed what I was looking at. The house still smelled like us, like whatever my mom had cooked for dinner 2 nights before. But every trace of an actual family living there was gone. I remember sitting down on the bare floor because there was nowhere else to sit, and reading that note maybe 15 times. Like the words would eventually rearrange themselves into something. That made sense. I didn't understand it then. And honestly, I still don't fully understand it now. What I've pieced together over the years, mostly from things my brother told me much later, is that my father had lost his job about 4 months before that day, and my parents were drowning in debt they'd been hiding from both of us. Somewhere in the panic of that collapse, they made a calculation. 2 teenagers were a lot to feed and house on nothing. 1 would be more manageable than 2. I was 16, working part-time, old enough in their eyes to figure something out. My brother was 11. Too young to leave behind without it looking, even to them, like something monstrous. I don't know if the decision to keep him, and not me, was about love, or just about which child seemed like less of a liability. I've spent a lot of years turning that question over without landing anywhere that feels settled. That first night I called the number I had from my mom's cell. Disconnected. Already, I called my aunt, my dad's sister, who I'd always been close with growing up. She sounded strange on the phone, evasive in a way I didn't have the emotional vocabulary yet to name as guilt. She said she didn't know anything, which I've since learned was a lie. She knew. She just didn't want to be the one dealing with the fallout. I ended up at my friend Dana's house that night, showing up on her doorstep with a backpack and no real explanation beyond. My family's gone. Her parents were kind about it in the confused, cautious way adults are kind about situations they don't fully understand and aren't sure they want to get involved in. They let me stay. 2 weeks, as it turned out, before their own financial situation. 4 kids of their own and a mortgage that ate most of what they made it clear that arrangement couldn't continue. I want to say something clearly here, because it matters to the rest of this story. Dana's parents weren't bad people. They did more for me in those 2 weeks than my own parents managed in the years before or after. But there's a limit to what strangers, even kind ones, can absorb, and I understood that even at 16. I packed my bag again on a Tuesday morning and said thank you and meant it. And then I didn't really have anywhere left to go. I want to walk you through what the next stretch actually looked like, because I think people hear I was homeless at 16 and picture something dramatic. And mostly it was just exhausting in 1,000 small, unglamorous ways. I had $600, saved from 2 summers of mowing lawns, which I'd put toward a car instead of anything else, mostly because I could see even then that a car meant options a bus pass didn't. It was a 19-year-old Honda Civic with a check engine light that never turned off and a passenger door that only opened from the inside. I slept in the back seat, parked behind a 24-hour Walmart because the lot stayed lit. And there was enough foot traffic that a parked car didn't draw attention. I learned things fast that I'm not proud of needing to learn. Which gas station bathrooms stayed unlocked overnight for restocking staff, how to wash up in a sink using paper towels, and hand soap well enough that you didn't smell like someone sleeping in a car, how to stretch a $5 bill across several days of gas station food, usually peanut butter crackers and whatever was on sale because it was cheap, filling, and didn't need refrigeration. I kept going to school. That part surprises people. but it made a strange kind of sense to me even then. School had a library with computers, and heat, and a place to sit that wasn't my car. It had a cafeteria where free lunch meant one guaranteed real meal a day. And underneath all of that, some stubborn part of me had decided that whatever my parents thought I was capable of handling on my own, I was going to prove I could handle more than that. Out of pure spite, if nothing else, I got a job at a diner about a month into all this, lying about my age by 2 years to get hired, working the early morning shift before school, and picking up whatever hours I could on weekends. My manager there, a woman named Carol, who I still send a Christmas card to every year, figured out my situation faster than I expected her to. She never made a big thing of it. She just started leaving me plates of food that were technically customer returns, and once, when I nearly fell asleep standing up during a slow Tuesday shift, sent me into the back office to nap for 20 minutes. On a folding cot she kept there for exactly that purpose. No questions asked. I finished high school 17 months after. That empty kitchen. Walked the graduation stage in a gown I'd bought. Secondhand off a girl a year ahead of me. In an auditorium full of families cheering for their kids. With nobody in that crowd who shared my last name. Carol came. She sat in the third row and cheered louder than anyone. And I've never forgotten that. The years right after graduation weren't dramatic, in the way people sometimes want a redemption story to be dramatic. There was no single lucky break. It was retail. Then a call center job answering complaints about a shipping company's late deliveries. 8 hours a day of apologizing to strangers for problems I hadn't caused. I hated it, and I was also, without fully realizing it, learning something valuable, which was how badly a company like that needed better internal systems, because I could see exactly where the process kept breaking down from the inside. At 20, I got hired as a data entry temp at a small regional logistics company, the kind of job nobody dreams about, but that pays slightly better than retail and comes with actual benefits. I noticed almost immediately that the way they were tracking shipment delays was a mess, spread across 4 different spreadsheets that never talked to each other, with 3 different people manually reconciling numbers that should have synced automatically. On a slow week, mostly out of boredom and a little bit of stubbornness, I built a simple tool that pulled all of it into one place. My supervisor noticed. Then his boss noticed. What started as a fix for my own annoyance turned into something the whole department started using, and eventually something 2 other branches of the company asked to use too. That's the honest, unglamorous origin of what eventually became my business. Not a stroke of genius. A spreadsheet built out of irritation. That happened to solve a real problem. By 23, I'd left the logistics company to build that tool out properly. Working out of a shared co-working space with one contractor, I paid in installments because I couldn't afford to pay him up front. By 26, that had grown into 11 employees and actual clients who paid real invoices. By 28, a larger company in the same industry made an offer to acquire what I'd built. An offer large enough that, for the first time since I was 16, I didn't have to do math in my head every time I looked at a grocery store receipt. I want to be honest about something here, because I think it matters more than the numbers. None of that success unhappened the version of me who slept behind a Walmart. It didn't erase 17-year-old me eating crackers for dinner, or the specific loneliness of a graduation with no family in the crowd. It just gave that person somewhere safe to finally land, years later than she should have had to wait. For 9 years, my family didn't reach out. Not a call, not a card, not so much as a message on a birthday. I want to be clear that I wasn't sitting around waiting for one either. Not by the end. I'd built something that functioned as family in the meantime. Carol from the diner. Dana, whose couch had been my first landing spot, and who I still talk to every week. A mentor named Robert I met through a small business association, who walked me through my first commercial loan application line by line. and never once asked why I didn't have a parent to co-sign. Anything. Then I did an interview. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. A business podcast focused on people who'd built companies from nothing. The kind of show with a modest, dedicated audience. I talked about bootstrapping, about the spreadsheet that started it all. And near the end, almost as an aside because the host asked, a follow-up question I hadn't fully prepared for. I mentioned that I'd been essentially on my own since I was 16. That clip got cut out and posted separately by one of the show's social accounts. Then it got picked up by a couple of larger pages. Within about 10 days, it had racked up several million views, mostly, I think. Because of that one detail, not the business advice. People connect with abandonment in a way they don't connect. With spreadsheets. Then the messages started. The first one was from my brother, Daniel, now 20. He said he'd seen the clip while scrolling one night and hadn't slept since. Said he'd spent years believing a version of events where I'd chosen to leave, chosen independence, chosen to cut contact with them, not the other way around. Said he wanted to know what actually happened, because none of it added up anymore now. That he'd heard my voice saying it out loud, unfiltered by our parents' version. I believed him mostly, and mostly still do. He was 11 the day I found that note, however complicit he became later. At the start, he was a kid handed a story by the adults he trusted, with no reason yet to question it. The second message came about 4 days later. From my mother. There was no apology in it. Just a paragraph about how proud she'd secretly always been of me. How she hoped, now that so much time had passed, we could put things behind us and move forward as a family again. The phrase as a family sat wrong with me, given that a family was exactly what had been taken off the table. 9 years earlier without a conversation. Didn't respond to either message right away. I sat with them for almost 2 weeks. The way you sit with a bruise you're not ready to press on yet. I talked to my therapist, a woman named Renata I'd been seeing on and off for about 3 years by that point, mostly to manage the low hum of anxiety. That never fully went away no matter how stable my life became. She didn't tell me what to do. She asked me what I actually wanted, separate from what I feared, and separate from what I thought I was supposed to want, which turned out to be a harder question than it sounds. Eventually, I agreed to meet Daniel. Just him, no parents. At a coffee shop I picked specifically because it was public, and neutral and close enough to my office, that I could leave quickly if I needed to. He looked older than I expected and more nervous than I expected too, in a way that made him seem younger at the same time, if that makes sense. We sat across from each other with our coffees for a long, awkward stretch of small talk before either of us said anything real. He told me his version first. That our parents had told him repeatedly over the years. That I'd wanted to strike out on my own. That I was staying with friends by choice. That I'd rejected the family. Not the reverse. He said he'd believed it because questioning it felt disloyal, and because he was 11. When it started and had absolutely no framework for questioning. What his parents told him about his own sister. When I told him what had actually happened, the car, the diner shifts, sleeping behind a Walmart, his face changed in a way I still think about. Not performative shock. Something quieter and worse. The look of someone realizing in real time exactly how much they didn't know about a person they'd spent 9 years believing they understood. He apologized more than once, in the specific over-repeating way people apologize, when the apology is really for themselves as much as for you. I told him I believed he was sorry. I also told him I wasn't sure yet what that was worth, and he didn't argue with that, which I respected. A week after that meeting, my father emailed me directly for the first time in 9 years. No apology in it either, just an explanation. The business he'd started after they moved had failed, not once, but twice. Medical bills for an ongoing issue with my mother's. Health had piled up faster than they could manage. And then, almost as a footnote at the very bottom of the email, a question about whether I might be in a position to help the family out financially, given everything I'd apparently built. That was the moment. It all clicked into a shape I recognized. The podcast clip hadn't made them miss me. It had made them notice, for the first time in 9 years, what I might now be worth to them. I brought this up with Daniel, honestly, over a phone call a few days later. Told him I wasn't going to become a source of income for people who'd left me to sleep in a car at 16. He didn't push back. If anything, there was something like relief in his voice, like he'd been waiting for someone to say it plainly. He admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that our parents had been leaning on him financially for years, too. Quiet loans that never got repaid, favors that only ever flowed one direction. His own adult life, it turned out, had been strained by the same pattern I'd escaped, just from a different angle. Closer to home, harder to name as exploitation because it came wrapped in constant reminders of everything they'd supposedly sacrificed raising him. Over the months that followed, things escalated in ways I hadn't fully braced for. My mother started emailing more frequently, the tone shifting gradually from wounded to increasingly insistent. My father showed up, uninvited, outside a small business panel I spoke at, standing near the exit in a way that felt less like a chance encounter, and more like he'd looked up my public schedule. Phone calls came at odd hours from numbers I didn't recognize. Numbers I eventually learned belonged to prepaid phones bought specifically because I'd blocked their usual ones. At one particularly low point, my mother sent a message that shifted from guilt into something closer to a threat. A vague line about how some things people share online don't tell the whole story, and maybe it's time people heard our side too. I understood that clearly enough as an attempt at leverage, a suggestion that they'd go public with. Some counter-narrative if I didn't come around. That's when I finally called a lawyer. Her name was Priscilla, recommended by Robert, my old mentor, who'd dealt with something adjacent in his own family years before, and knew exactly which kind of attorney this situation called for. She was calm in a way that helped me stay calm, walked me through documenting everything, every email, every call log, every appearance near my office or events, building a clear timeline that showed a pattern, not an isolated lapse in judgment. We filed for a restraining order. Priscilla laid it out plainly for the judge. The abandonment 9 years earlier, the sudden reappearance timed suspiciously close to a viral moment about my financial success, the shift from guilt-driven outreach to implicit threats. Once I set a boundary they didn't like. My parents showed up to the hearing without a lawyer of their own. My father tried to frame the whole thing as an overreaction, said they only wanted to reconnect, that they loved their daughter, and didn't understand why simple outreach had escalated to a courtroom. The judge asked him directly whether he'd left a 16-year-old alone when the family relocated. He didn't have a clean answer for that. The order was granted. I won't pretend. That hearing gave me some cinematic sense of closure. Mostly I just felt tired, and a little bit disbelieving that it had taken a judge's signature to get something that should have been obvious from the start. That abandoning a child and reappearing 9 years later to ask for money isn't reconciliation. What actually did feel like something worth building came after, slowly through Daniel. He and his wife, Priya, eventually decided to relocate closer to where I lived. Partly to put distance between themselves and our parents' orbit, partly, I think, because he wanted a real relationship with me and knew it couldn't happen from 3 states away built entirely on phone calls. I got to know my niece, a small, relentlessly curious 4-year-old named Marin, who took about 2 visits to decide. I was trustworthy enough to show her entire stuffed animal collection to narrate it individually at length. We started having dinner together most Sundays, an ordinary, almost boring routine that would have sounded like fantasy to the 17-year-old walking a graduation stage alone. Priya turned out to be sharper about the whole situation than either Daniel or I had been at first, the one who actually pushed him to stop making excuses. For our parents' behavior once she heard the full timeline, the one who quietly built a friendship with me. That had nothing to do with our shared family history, and everything to do with just genuinely liking each other's company. I still go to therapy every week with Renata. I still have nights where I wake up at 3 in the morning with my chest tight for no immediate reason, and it takes me a minute to remember I'm 31 in my own apartment, with a locked door and nobody outside it. Healing from something like this isn't linear, and I've stopped expecting it to resolve into a clean, finished feeling. I don't know if I'll ever fully make peace with what my parents did, or whether peace is even the right goal to chase. I'm not interested in performing forgiveness I don't actually feel, just to give this story a tidier ending than it's earned. What I do know, with more certainty than I've felt about almost anything else in my life, is that the family I have now isn't the one I was born into. It's the one I built, deliberately, slowly, out of people who chose to show up when it actually mattered. Carol with her folding cot in a diner back office. Dana's parents who took in a stranded 16-year-old for 2 weeks they couldn't really afford. Robert walking a broke 23-year-old through a loan application. Daniel finally choosing the truth over the story he'd been handed. That, in the end, turned out to be worth infinitely more than anything a note left on an empty kitchen floor could ever take away. Subscribe.